Steph, Caregivers Chronicles Unveiled, the critical care unit for caregivers. Real conversations, real care, real healing. Doc Steph, I see your hands holding the weight of 100 plans. Soft in the dark, strong in the light. You make it feel a little more right. Take a breath.
Hey, one of the greatest misconceptions about compassion fatigue is the belief that recovery happens automatically. We assume that if we can just get through a difficult season, take a short break, or catch up on some sleep, everything will return to normal. Yet, many caregivers discovered that rebuilding ourselves requires more than rest. It requires restoration. Over the last several episodes, we have talked about compassion fatigue, the warning signs that often go unnoticed, and the disconnection that can occur when caregiving demands so much of our attention that we begin losing touch with ourselves. Today, I want to shift our focus from recognition to restorations. Restoration. What do I do now? That is the question. Welcome back to Caregivers Chronicle Unveiled. I am your host, Doc Staff. So, if you recognize yourself in these conversations, I want you to know that awareness is important, but it is not enough because it does not create change. Recognizing compassion fatigue is valuable, but eventually we must begin exploring how to restore the parts of ourselves that have received little attention while caregiving has occupied so much of our time, energy, and focus. One of the things I have learned is that rebuilding compassion is not about becoming the person we were before caregiving. Caregiving changes us. It teaches us lessons about sacrifice, responsibility, grief, patience, and perseverance that become part of who we are. So the goal is not to erase those experiences, but to rebuild ourselves in a way that allows us to continue caring without neglecting our own well being. If we go back to the last episode, when we discussed 4 places where we feel or felt disconnection, we can focus on how to build those areas. The first one is relationship with ourselves. One of the first areas we need to rebuild is our relationship with ourselves. That may sound unusual because most of us spend every day with ourselves. Yet, there is a difference between living with ourselves and remaining connected to others. Compassion fatigue often develops during seasons when our attention is consistently or constantly directed outward. We become focused on schedules, appointments, medications, finances, household responsibilities, and the needs of the people dependent on us. It becomes easy to lose sight of our own needs, interests, emotions, and aspirations. Rebuilding compassion begins with self awareness. It requires creating space to honestly evaluate how we're doing emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually. It requires acknowledging that we have needs, limitations, and areas that deserve attention. It may be uncomfortable, however, we have become accustomed to being the helper, the supporter, the problem solver, and the person others rely on. So be a little patient with yourself. Shifting some of that attention toward ourselves can feel unfamiliar. Yet restoration often begins when we permit ourselves to matter. 2, rebuilding through connection. One of the challenges of caregiving is that isolation can quietly become normal. Responsibilities consume time, energy becomes limited, social opportunities become less frequent. Before long, we find ourselves operating within a much smaller circle than we once did. Human beings are not designed to navigate. difficult seasons entirely alone. We need support. We need encouragement. We need people who understand. We need spaces where we can speak honestly without feeling judged. So, rebuilding compassion often involves rebuilding connection. Sometimes that means reconnecting with family members or trusted friends. Sometimes it means joining a support group or participating in a community where other caregivers understand the realities of the role. Sometimes it simply means allowing ourselves to receive help when it is offered. One of the interesting things about caregiving is that we often become very comfortable giving support while remaining uncomfortable receiving it. Yet, healthy relationships involve both. Allowing others to support us does not diminish our strength. It reminds us that we were never intended to navigate life's challenges entirely on our own. And three, rebuilding joy. Oh, that's another area that often requires attention. Joy. Compassion fatigue has a way of narrowing our focus, leaving life centered almost entirely on responsibilities. Days become structured around what needs to be done, what problems need to be solved, and what concerns require our attention. As a result, activity that once brought enjoyment, creativity, laughter, and renewal often become less frequent. What makes this particularly important is that joy is not simply entertainment. Joy contributes to emotional health. Joy creates opportunities for renewal. Joy reminds us that we are more than our responsibilities. Rebuilding compassion often includes reconnecting with activities that bring life, energy, and meaning. These activities will differ from person to person. For some, it may involve spending time outdoors. For others, it may be reading, music, art, exercise, travel, or meaningful conversations. The activity itself is less important than what it provides. Moments of enjoyment remind us that life consists of more than obligations. But the one thing that I found, coming out of caregiving is that I started the connections by being around, but it's not like you could just pick up where you left off or pick up that person that's inside of you. So for a while, I would, just be present, but and listening and smiling because I couldn't remember how to join into a conversation. But as time went on, I slowly and slowly was back into it. Um, so it takes time. That's all I want to say, that it takes time, but we have to put forth the effort. And number four, rebuilding spirituality. Perhaps the most important area of restoration involves our spiritual well being. One of the challenges caregivers frequently face is the belief that because they are serving others, they can neglect their own need for spiritual renewal. Scripture presents a different picture throughout the Bible. We see examples of individuals who required periods of restoration before continuing their work and responsibilities. We see God providing rest, nourishment, encouragement, and renewal to people who had become weary. So, spiritual restoration involves more than maintaining religious routines. And I say that because we could be still praying, in which for myself, I call empty prayers. It's just out of routine. Our conversations with God, we normally probably would be just sprouting out concerns or our situations instead of having an honest conversation with God about some of the realities or some of the future, and about the things that they have blessed us with. It involves reconnecting with God in ways that renew our perspective, strengthen our faith, and remind us that our worth is not based solely upon what we do for others. Caregiving may be part of our calling, it is not our entire identity. Our identity remains rooted in who we are as children of God. So, familiarizing ourselves with that again, that purpose again, and reconnecting with God is very important. One of the lessons I learned through caregiving is that restoration does not happen automatically simply because responsibilities decrease or circumstances improve. So I don't know, I may have shared this with you before. So once, um, I discontinued caregiving, or there wasn't a need for me to do caregiving in the aspect of being a caregiver for a family member. Um, but it also, there's different professional areas that require us to be caregiving. For me, as a chaplain, for me, it is for others because caregiving also involves the care of souls. So for a long time, I assumed that if I could just get through this next challenge, everything would eventually return to normal. So once I finished, caregiving, I thought things would return to normal. What I discovered was that recovery required intentionality. Certain areas of my life had been neglected for so long that they needed more than rest. They needed renewal. And I did so through professional counseling. Um, as well as the fact that I counsel, but I needed my own counseling, a different perspective, you know, and I may know some of the things that could help a person through this, but when you're actually going through it, um, it just don't seem the same. So me seeking therapy helped me to see from a different perspective and to see things more clearly to get back on track. I had to connect with parts of myself that had received very little attention. I had to become honest about my own needs rather than focusing exclusively on everyone else's. I had to recognize that caring for myself was not competing with caregiving. In many ways, it was strengthening my ability to continue to care, um, and to do it well. That realization changed how I reviewed restoration. It became about rebuilding the foundation that would allow me to continue showing up in healthy, sustainable ways. So I encourage you, and with one of my favorite passages for caregivers is Psalms 23, particularly verse 3, which simply says, He restores my soul. I appreciate the simplicity of that statement because it reminds us that restoration is a part of God's character. I found that it is okay to be in a state of exhaustion. However, it's not okay to remain there. God understands depletion. God understands weariness. God understands seasons when we feel emotionally, physically, mentally, or spiritually exhausted. More importantly, God is not only concerned about the people we care for, He is concerned about us as well. I can't say that enough. Restoration is not something we must earn. It is something God desires for His people. So, in closing, rebuilding compassion it's not about becoming perfect, nor is it about reclaiming a version of ourselves that existed before caregiving. Life changes us, period. Experiences shape us, responsibilities influence us. So don't be surprised if you come out of this, or even while you're in it, that you begin to change, but in a more positive way once we work on our restoration, why we accepted this type of job, or why the role itself. So we do not want to go backward. We need to move forward in healthier ways. Perhaps the invitation in this season is to consider what areas of our own lives need attention, renewal, and care. If today's conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to join the conversation and share your experiences. I'm telling you, you just don't understand how important it is to share your experience with somebody else who also understands it. So, what has helped you restore your emotional, physical, spiritual, or relational well being? Let us know. Your story may offer encouragement and hope to another caregiver trying to find their way forward. So, thank you for joining me for this episode of Caregivers Chronicles Unveiled. Again, I am Doc Steph, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with you as we explore sustainable caregiving and what it means to care for others without losing ourselves in the process. Peace and blessings.
Dark stuff. Real conversations, real care, real healing. Real conversations, real care, real healing.